Elena Vasquez stood at the window of the starship watching the blue and silver planet grow larger as they approached. Centauri Prime looked like a jewel floating in space. The cities sparkled like diamonds across the surface. This was the home, world of the Galactic Council, and Elena was about to become the first human to walk on its soil. She touched the datapad in her hand. It contained everything humanity wanted to say to the galaxy. Years of work by thousands of people had gone into preparing this document. Scientists had written about human discoveries. Artists had shared their greatest works. Diplomats had crafted careful words about peace and friendship. Elena had been chosen for this mission because she was the best diplomat Earth had ever produced. She spoke 12 languages and had solved conflicts that others thought impossible. She had brought peace between the Mars colonies and the asteroid miners. She had negotiated trade deals with the outer planets. Now she faced her greatest challenge. The ship's captain, James Morrison, walked up beside her. "Nervous?" he asked. "Excited," Elena replied. "We've been waiting for this invitation for 30 years. Ever since we first made contact with the Galactic Council, we've dreamed of joining them." Captain Morrison nodded. The first contact had happened when human ships reached Alpha Centauri. The Council had been watching Earth for decades but never made contact. They said humans needed to prove they could travel between stars before they would talk to them. When humans finally built ships that could cross the vast distances between stars, the Council sent a message. It was simple. You may now request to join the galactic community. Send one representative to Centauri Prime. That was 2 years ago. Since then, Earth had worked day and night to prepare. They studied everything they could about the 12 species that made up the Galactic Council. They learned about their cultures, their histories, their technologies. The Council species were ancient and powerful. The Zephyrians looked like living crystals and could manipulate energy with their minds. The Luminals were beings of pure light who lived for thousands of years. The Karathi were warriors who had conquered half their galaxy before joining the Council. Each species had abilities that seemed like magic to humans, but humans had something too. They had curiosity. They had the ability to adapt and learn. They had survived ice ages and wars and plagues on their homeworld. They had spread across their solar system and built thriving colonies on dead worlds. Elena believed this would be enough. She believed the Council would see the value in humanity and welcome them as equals. The ship shuddered slightly as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the window, Elena could see the Council building growing larger. It was a massive structure that seemed to reach into the clouds, made of materials that shifted color in the light. It was beautiful and intimidating at the same time. Final approach, the pilot announced over the communication system. Elena straightened her formal diplomatic uniform. She had practiced her opening speech hundreds of times. She knew every word of the human petition by heart. She was ready. As the ship landed, Elena saw them waiting. Representatives of all 12 Council species stood in a formal line on the landing platform. The Zephyrian delegate sparkled like a rainbow in the sunlight. The luminal representative glowed with inner light. The Karathi warrior stood tall and proud in ceremonial armor. Elena took a deep breath and walked down the ramp of her ship. This was the moment that would change everything for humanity. The Zephyrian delegate stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music. Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the species called humans. You come seeking membership in the Galactic Council. I do, Elena replied, following the formal protocols she had studied. Humanity offers friendship, knowledge, and peaceful cooperation to all members of the galactic community. We shall see, the Zephyrian said. Follow us. They walked through corridors filled with wonders. The walls showed moving pictures of distant worlds. Plants from a dozen different planets grew in perfect harmony. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy. Elena tried not to stare, but everything was amazing. Human technology was advanced by Earth standards, but this was beyond anything they had imagined. The Council species had been traveling between stars for millions of years. They had built an empire that spanned the galaxy. They entered a vast chamber where the Council would meet. 12 seats arranged in a circle, each designed for a different type of being. Above them, a dome showed the stars of the galaxy, with trade routes and colonies marked in different colors. "You will present your case tomorrow," the Zephyrian delegate explained. "Tonight you will rest and prepare." Elena was taken to quarters that were comfortable but simple. She spent the evening reviewing her notes one more time. The presentation would cover everything: human history, culture, technology, and dreams for the future. She talked to Captain Morrison through the communication device. "How does it look?" he asked. "Impressive," Elena said. "Almost overwhelming. But I think they'll listen to what we have to say." "Any problems?" Elena paused. Something felt strange about how the council delegates had looked at her, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. "I'm not sure, maybe they're just being formal. This is an important decision for them too." That night, Elena barely slept. She kept thinking about everything humanity had accomplished. They had ended wars on their own planet. They had learned to work together despite their differences. They had built cities under the ocean and on the surfaces of moons. They had created art and music and stories that moved people to tears or laughter. Surely the council would see the value in adding humanity to their ranks. Humans could contribute so much to galactic civilization. The next morning, Elena dressed in her finest clothes and made her way to the council chamber. The 12 delegates were already seated in their positions. The chamber felt different now, more formal and cold. The Zephyrian delegate spoke. "Ambassador Vasquez, you may present humanity's petition for membership in the Galactic Council." Elena stepped forward and began to speak. She talked about human achievements in science and art. She described their colonies and their peaceful exploration of space. She explained how humans had learned to overcome their differences and work together. As she spoke, Elena noticed the expressions on the faces of the council delegates. They did not look impressed. They looked bored or worse, annoyed. The Karathi delegate kept making notes on a device. The luminal's glow seemed to dim. Elena finished her presentation and waited. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, the Zephyrian delegate spoke. "We have heard your petition. Now we must discuss what we have learned about your species." What they had learned? Elena felt confused. She had just told them everything about humanity. But as the delegates began to speak, Elena realized they had been studying humans for much longer than anyone on Earth had known. They had records of human wars, human conflicts, human expansion into space. They had been watching and judging, and they had already made up their minds. The trial was about to begin, and Elena was starting to understand that humanity was not being invited to join the council. They were being put on trial for crimes they didn't even know they had committed. The real diplomatic mission was just beginning, and it was not going to be the peaceful welcome Elena had prepared for. The next morning, Elena woke up feeling uneasy. Something about yesterday's meeting had felt wrong. The council delegates had not asked questions about her presentation. They had not seemed interested in learning more about humanity. Instead, they had looked at her like she was already guilty of something. When Elena arrived at the council chamber, she found it had changed overnight. What had been a meeting room was now set up like a courtroom. The 12 council seats were raised, higher, looking down at a single chair in the center. Armed guards stood at every door. "Please sit," the Zephyrian delegate commanded, pointing to the lone chair. Elena sat down, feeling very small in the huge chamber. "I thought we were here to discuss humanity's membership in the council." The luminal delegate's glow flared brighter. "We are here to discuss the threat that humanity poses to galactic civilization." "Threat?" Elena stood up quickly. "What threat?" "Humans have been peaceful in every contact we've made with other species." "Sit down," the Karathi delegate growled. His voice was deep and frightening. "You will speak only when asked to speak." Elena sat, her mind racing. This was not a diplomatic meeting. This was a trial, and she was the defendant. The Zephyrian delegate began reading from a long document. "The species known as humans have been observed for 73 Earth years. In that time, they have shown consistent patterns of aggression, territorial expansion, and resource exploitation. Images appeared in the air above the chamber. Elena watched in horror as scenes from human history played out. Wars, battles, cities burning. But these were not recent events. These were from decades or even centuries ago. Your species has fought over 100 major wars in the past 500 years, the Zephyrian continued. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your entire planet. You have polluted your oceans and poisoned your atmosphere. Elena found her voice. Those are old events. Humanity has changed. We haven't had a major war in over 50 years. We've cleaned up our planet. We've learned from our mistakes. The luminal delegate spoke, its voice like wind chimes. You have spread to 12 star systems in less than 100 years. This rate of expansion is unprecedented and dangerous. We've built colonies to give our people better lives, Elena protested. We've terraformed dead worlds and made them green. We've created new homes without harming anyone. You have contaminated 12 pristine star systems with your presence, the Karathi delegate snarled. You have altered the natural order of those worlds to suit your biology. Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. We've followed every galactic law we were made aware of. We've avoided systems with intelligent life. We've been careful to protect existing ecosystems. The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline body pulsed with light. You were not given permission to expand. You took what you wanted without asking. How could we ask? We didn't know you existed until we reached Alpha Centauri. We followed the same expansion pattern that every spacefaring species must follow. But Elena could see it didn't matter what, she said. The council had already decided. They saw human expansion as invasion. They saw human colonies as contamination. They saw human progress as a threat. More images appeared. Human ships, human cities, human technology. But now Elena saw them through the council's eyes. Where she saw exploration and achievement, they saw aggression and danger. Your species multiplies too quickly, another delegate said. Elena recognized them as a Silthani, a plant-like being. Your population grows at an unsustainable rate. You will consume all available resources. We've controlled our population growth, Elena said. Our birth rates have stabilized. We use renewable energy. We recycle everything. For now, the Silthani replied, but your nature will not change. You will grow and expand until you have consumed everything. The trial continued for hours. Each council delegate presented evidence of humanity's supposed crimes. They had records of every human conflict, every environmental mistake, every moment of expansion. They had been watching and judging for decades. Elena defended her species as best she could. She talked about human art and music and literature. She described human compassion and charity. She explained how humans had overcome their violent past to build a peaceful civilization. But the council was not interested in humanity's achievements. They only cared about their fears. Finally, the Zephyrian delegate called for silence. We have heard enough. The council will now decide the fate of humanity. The 12 delegates spoke among themselves in languages Elena could not understand. She sat alone in her chair, watching the beings who held her species' future in their hands. After an hour, they finished their discussion. The Zephyrian delegate stood. The Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision. The species known as humans are declared to be a galactic contaminant. They pose an unacceptable threat to civilized space. Elena's blood turned cold. What does that mean? It means your species will be cleansed from the galaxy before you can spread further. Elena jumped to her feet. You can't be serious. We're talking about billions of innocent people. Families, children, entire civilizations. The Karathi delegate laughed, a harsh sound. The same billions who would eventually threaten every other species in the galaxy. Better to end this now, before you become too strong. We demand that you surrender your colonies and return to your homeworld, the Zephyrian said. Your species will be confined to the Sol system and monitored closely. Elena felt sick. And if we refuse? Then you will be eliminated entirely. The chamber fell silent. Elena realized she was looking at beings who had just casually discussed the genocide of her entire species. "There's something else," the luminal delegate said, its glow growing brighter. "To demonstrate the consequences of refusal, we will make an example." Guards moved toward Elena. She backed away, her heart pounding. "I'm a diplomat. I have immunity under galactic law." "Galactic law applies only to civilized species," the Zephyrian said. "Contaminants have no rights." The guards grabbed Elena's arms. She struggled, but they were incredibly strong. "You're making a terrible mistake," she shouted. "Humans are not your enemies. We could have been your allies, your friends." "Take her to the execution chamber," the Zephyrian commanded. As they dragged Elena away, she managed one last look at the council delegates. They watched her with cold, alien eyes. To them, she was not a person. She was just a disease to be eliminated. The guards took Elena to a room deep in the building. Strange machines lined the walls. In the center was a platform surrounded by energy projectors. "The molecular incinerator," one guard explained with obvious pleasure. "It will burn every cell in your body while keeping you conscious. The process takes approximately 10 minutes. Elena was forced onto the platform. Energy fields held her in place. "This execution will be broadcast to all human colonies," the Zephyrian delegate announced as it entered the chamber. "Your species will see what happens to contaminants who refuse to submit." Elena looked directly into the recording device. She thought of her family on Earth, her friends, everyone she had ever cared about. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice steady despite her terror. "I came here as humanity's ambassador, offering peace and friendship. Instead, I found hatred and fear." The energy projectors began to glow. "To everyone watching this, remember what you see here. Remember that we tried to be civilized. Remember that we offered them everything and they chose murder instead." The pain began, starting in her fingers and toes. Elena gritted her teeth. "Remember us," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Make them remember us all." The last thing Elena saw was the cold satisfaction in the Zephyrian delegate's crystalline face. The last thing she felt was not just the agony of her death, but the absolute certainty that this moment would change everything. Humanity had sent their best and brightest to make peace. The council had responded with execution and threats of genocide. They thought they were sending a message of fear. Instead, they had just declared war on the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They just didn't know it yet. The message reached Earth 18 hours after Elena Vasquez died. The quantum communication array received the transmission from Centauri Prime at exactly 14:32 Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday afternoon. Within minutes, the recording was being analyzed by emergency committees in every major government building on Earth. President Maria Chen sat in the crisis room deep beneath the United Nations building, watching the execution footage for the third time. Around the table, the faces of world leaders showed the same mixture of horror and rage that she felt. "They burned her alive," whispered the European Union representative. "They kept her conscious while her body was destroyed cell by cell." "She was a diplomat," said the African Federation president, his hands shaking with anger. "She had immunity under every law we know." President Chen paused the video at Elena's final words. The woman's face filled the screen, brave even in agony. "Remember us. Make them remember us all." "They made a mistake," President Chen said quietly. "They thought this would terrify us into submission. Instead, they've shown us exactly what kind of beings we're dealing with." The recording had already been broadcast to every human colony, from Mars to the outer asteroid mining stations, from the Europa research domes to the generation ships heading for distant stars. Humanity had watched their ambassador die. The reaction was immediate and universal. Rage. Cold, calculating rage. Within 6 hours of the broadcast, every human military installation had gone to maximum alert. Within 12 hours, colony governors were activating emergency war powers. Within 24 hours, President Chen stood before the largest audience in human history. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of human space. You have all seen what happened to Ambassador Vasquez. You have all heard the Galactic Council's demands. They want us to abandon our colonies and confine ourselves to Earth like prisoners. Chen paused, letting her words sink in. They call us contaminants. They call us a threat to civilized space. They say we must be cleansed from the galaxy for the good of all. The anger in her voice was controlled but unmistakable. Let me be clear about humanity's response to these demands. We will not abandon our colonies. We will not submit to alien judgment. We will not hide in fear while they decide our fate. Chen looked directly into the camera. As of this moment, I am invoking total war protocols. Every human world, every station, every ship is now part of our military effort. The Galactic Council wanted to see what humans are capable of when threatened. They will learn. The total. War protocols had been written after the resource wars of the 22nd century, when humanity had nearly destroyed itself fighting over water and rare metals. The protocols were designed for one purpose: to mobilize every aspect of human civilization for war. Within hours, the transformation began. Civilian factories stopped making consumer goods and started producing weapons. Scientists abandoned their research projects and focused on military applications. Artists and writers began creating propaganda to unite humanity against their alien enemies. But this was not the panicked mobilization of a desperate species. This was the calculated preparation of a civilization that had learned hard lessons about survival. The Council had made a critical error in their assessment of humanity. They had looked at human history and seen only violence and chaos. They had missed the most important truth about humans. They learned from their mistakes. The wars that the Council pointed to as evidence of human savagery had taught humanity valuable lessons. They had learned that total war required total commitment. They had learned that enemies who threatened survival deserved no mercy. Most importantly, they had learned that the only way to end a war was to win it completely. Director Sarah Hayes stood in the command center of the Luna Defense Station, watching status reports stream in from across human space. As head of Human Intelligence Services, she had been preparing for this possibility for decades. "What's our current military strength?" she asked her aide. "Official strength: 200 ships of the line, 50,000 Marines, basic, kinetic, weapons and chemical rockets," the aide replied. Hayes smiled coldly. "And our actual strength? Classified military strength: 800 ships with experimental drives, 2 million trained soldiers, and weapon systems the Council doesn't know exist." For 30 years, human military planners had been preparing for the possibility that first contact might go badly. They had built hidden shipyards in asteroid belts. They had developed weapons using technologies reverse-engineered from Council broadcasts. They had trained soldiers for battles in alien environments. Most importantly, they had kept it all secret. The Galactic Council thought they knew humanity's capabilities. They had watched human expansion and judged their technology primitive. They expected kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. They were prepared to face the same level of technology they had observed for decades. They had no idea what was actually coming. In the research stations of Europa, scientists worked around the clock to weaponize discoveries that had been theoretical just days before. The quantum mechanics research that was supposed to lead to better computers was now focused on quantum bombs. The biotechnology projects designed to cure diseases were being modified to create biological weapons tailored to alien physiologies. On Mars, the terraforming equipment that had turned a dead world into a garden was being retooled to strip atmosphere from enemy planets. In the asteroid belt, mining lasers were being mounted on warships. On the generation ships heading for distant stars, colonists were receiving new orders: find hidden bases for the coming war. But perhaps the most important change was in humanity itself. The execution of Elena Vasquez had done something the Council never intended. It had unified humanity completely. For the first time in human history, every nation, every colony, every faction was working toward the same goal. Political differences were set aside. Religious conflicts were forgotten. Economic competition was suspended. All that mattered now was survival and revenge. Captain James Morrison had commanded Elena's diplomatic ship. Now he stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, a warship that officially didn't exist. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, preparing for humanity's first strike. "Status report," Morrison ordered. "All systems green, Captain. Quantum drive ready, weapons armed, target coordinates locked in." Morrison looked at the tactical display. 50 human ships were positioned around enemy targets across Council space. Ships that the enemy didn't know existed, carrying weapons the enemy couldn't imagine. "Captain," his communications officer said, "we're receiving confirmation from all strike groups. They're ready and waiting for your order." Morrison thought about Elena Vasquez. She had believed in diplomacy, in peace, in the possibility that different species could work together. The Council had murdered her for that belief. "Send this message to all ships," Morrison said. "Operation Elena begins in 60 seconds for humanity, for Elena, for everyone they plan to murder." Across human space, similar scenes were playing out. Mothers kissed their children goodbye as they reported to military duty. Fathers taught their sons and daughters how to use weapons. Grandparents shared stories of the old wars, reminding everyone what humans were capable of when their survival was threatened. The Council had called humanity a contamination that needed to be cleansed. They had tried to use fear to control a species they didn't understand. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to submit to extinction. The galaxy was about to discover what humans really were when someone threatened to wipe them out. They were not contaminants or threats to civilization. They were the apex predator species of a world where only the strongest survived, and they were about to remind the galaxy why that mattered. The countdown reached 0. 50 human ships disappeared into quantum space, carrying death to the species that had murdered humanity's ambassador. The war had begun. The first strike came without warning at 300 hours Galactic Standard Time. Across 50 Council worlds, human ships appeared from quantum space like ghosts materializing from nowhere. The Council's long-range sensors, designed to detect traditional, faster-than-light travel, registered nothing until the attackers were already in weapons range. Admiral Zarseth of the Zephyrian Defense Fleet was drinking morning stimulant in his command center on Crystallis Prime when the alarms began shrieking. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see his beautiful crystal city stretching toward the sunrise. "Report," he commanded, his musical voice tight with concern. "Unknown ships have appeared in the inner system," his aide replied, tentacles trembling with stress. 76 vessels, configuration unknown. They're not using any drive system in our databases." Zarseth felt the first stirring of unease. "Are they human ships?" "Impossible to confirm, Admiral. The energy signatures don't match anything we've observed from human technology." On the tactical display, Zarseth watched the unknown ships move with frightening precision. They weren't approaching in the random pattern of raiders or the formal formations of civilized warfare. They moved like a school of predator fish, flowing around defensive positions, probing for weaknesses. "Open a communication channel," Zarseth ordered. "This is Admiral Zarseth of the Galactic Council Defense Fleet. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came in perfect Zephyrian, but the voice was unmistakably human. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Forces. We are here for Elena Vasquez." Zarseth's crystalline body pulsed with confusion. The human ambassador was executed according to Council law. She was a representative of a contaminant species. "She was a diplomat under galactic protection," Captain Chen replied. "Your people murdered her. Now you pay the price." The human ships opened fire, but these were not the primitive kinetic weapons the Council expected. Beams of coherent plasma, hot as the core of a star, sliced through Zephyrian energy shields, like they were made of paper. Gravity bombs created micro-black holes that tore Council ships apart from the inside. Quantum missiles phased through armor and exploded inside their targets. Zarseth watched in horror as his fleet was destroyed in minutes. Ships that had patrolled the galaxy for centuries, vessels equipped with the most advanced technology in known space, were torn apart by weapons that shouldn't have existed. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "Our intelligence said human technology was centuries behind our own." His aide was frantically working at a control panel, trying to coordinate a defense. "Admiral, we're receiving similar reports from 50 other Council worlds. Human forces are attacking simultaneously across our entire territory." The scope of the attack was staggering. Humans were not just striking at one or two targets. They were attacking everywhere at once with ships that appeared from nowhere and weapons that defied every tactical assumption the Council had made. On the industrial world of Karathis VII, General Thakmor watched his fortress city burn from orbit as human bombardment ships reduced it to molten slag. The humans weren't trying to capture the planet. They were methodically destroying every structure, every factory, every defensive position. "Send a message to the Council." Thakmor growled into his communicator as his bunker shook from another impact. "The humans are not fighting like civilized beings. They're not following any rules of warfare. They're just destroying everything." But the Council was discovering that human warfare had no rules except victory. On the research world of Lumina 3, Dr. Veltar had been working on energy manipulation experiments when the attack began. She watched from her laboratory as human soldiers moved through the facility with terrifying efficiency. These were not the clumsy primitives the Council expected. The human soldiers moved like shadows, using advanced stealth technology and weapons that adapted to each situation. When they encountered luminal energy beings, they used specially designed containment fields. When they faced Karathi warriors, they deployed sonic weapons that disrupted their nervous systems. "They've studied us," Dr. Veltar realized with growing horror. "They know exactly how to fight each species. They've planned for this." The humans had indeed planned for this. For 30 years, human intelligence services had been intercepting Council communications, studying their technology, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses. Every species in the Council had been cataloged, dissected, and strategically prepared. 4 Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her ship, the UES Vengeance, watching the destruction of Crystallis Prime. The beautiful crystal spires that had stood for thousands of years were collapsing into rainbow dust as human plasma cannons reduced them to their component atoms. "Captain," her weapons officer reported, "all primary targets are destroyed. Shall we begin orbital bombardment of the civilian centers?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. Elena Vasquez had believed in protecting innocent life, even alien life. But Elena was dead, murdered by these same beings who now cowered in their crystal cities. "Negative," Sarah decided. "Our target is military infrastructure only. We're here to cripple their war-making ability, not commit genocide." But even as she gave the order, Sarah knew that mercy might be a luxury humanity couldn't afford. The Council had declared humans a contamination to be cleansed. They had shown no mercy to Elena Vasquez. How long would humanity maintain moral constraints that their enemies didn't share? Across Council space, similar scenes played out. Human forces struck with unprecedented coordination and technological superiority. The beings who had dismissed humanity as primitive savages found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. On the communications world of Nexus Prime, the central hub of the Council's information network, human cyber warfare specialists uploaded quantum viruses directly into the planetary computer core. The viruses, designed by artificial intelligence systems that had evolved for decades in secret, adapted and spread faster than any biological plague. Within hours, the entire Council communication network was compromised. Military orders became garbled. Supply shipments were rerouted to wrong destinations. Defensive coordinates were scrambled. The Council was fighting blind while humanity could see everything. Admiral Zarseth managed to escape the destruction of his fleet in a small transport ship. As he fled toward Council headquarters, he tried to understand what had gone wrong. The humans were supposed to be technologically inferior. Intelligence reports had shown them using primitive chemical rockets and kinetic weapons. Their expansion had been slow and cautious, suggesting a species that avoided conflict. But the beings attacking Council space fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They coordinated across impossible distances. They used weapons that violated known physics. They struck with the precision of a surgical instrument and the violence of a natural disaster. Send an emergency message to the Council, Zarseth ordered, his pilot. We need immediate military support at all colonies. The humans are not what we thought they were. But it was too late for military support. In the space of 6 hours, human forces had crippled the Council's ability to coordinate a response. Their communication networks were compromised, their supply lines disrupted, their military leadership scattered or dead. The Council members who gathered in emergency session on Centauri Prime looked nothing like the confident beings who had ordered Elena Vasquez's execution just days before. The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline body was dim with fear. The luminal representative flickered weakly. The Karathi warrior's armor was scorched from a battle he had barely survived. How many colonies have we lost? The Zephyrian delegate asked. 47 worlds have been attacked, the Karathi replied. Military installations on all of them have been destroyed or captured. Civilian casualties are surprisingly low, but our war-making capacity has been reduced by 70%. In 6 hours, the luminal delegate whispered. They destroyed most of our military in 6 hours. The Zephyrian delegate looked at the tactical display showing the scope of human attacks. Red markers indicated worlds under assault. There were dozens of them scattered across thousands of light years. How is this possible? Our intelligence said they had perhaps 200 ships total. Our intelligence was wrong, the Karathi admitted. They've been hiding their true capabilities for decades. The ships attacking us are using technology we've never seen before. Weapons we don't understand. Tactics we can't counter. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Galactic Council, rulers of the galaxy for millions of years, had just been outsmarted and outfought by a species they had dismissed as primitive. What do they want? The luminal delegate asked. The answer came in the form of a transmission received simultaneously by every Council world. Captain Sarah Chen's face appeared on screens across the galaxy, her expression cold and determined. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Forces. You murdered our ambassador in violation of every law of civilized conduct. You declared war on humanity without cause. You threatened to commit genocide against our entire species. Chen paused, letting her words sink in across 100 worlds. 2 years after Elena Vasquez died on Centauri Prime, President Maria Chen stood in what had once been the Galactic Council's Grand Assembly Chamber. The magnificent dome that had shown the stars of the galaxy now displayed a new map, with human colonies spreading like points of light across former Council territory. The 12 ornate seats where the Council delegates had once passed judgment on lesser species were empty. Some of the former Council members were dead. Others had surrendered and accepted human rule. A few had fled to the Outer Rim, where they scratched out a living on forgotten worlds. Status report, President Chen said to Admiral Sarah Chen, who had been promoted after her successful command of the opening attacks. The last Karathi strongholds fell yesterday, Admiral Chen reported. General Thakmor surrendered his remaining forces rather than see his homeworld turned to glass. The Luminal Collective has agreed to our terms. The Zephyrian refugees are requesting permission to settle on the reservation worlds we've designated for them. President Chen nodded. The war had lasted longer than anyone expected, but not because the Council forces were strong. They had fought, with the desperation of beings facing extinction, using every weapon and strategy they could imagine. It hadn't been enough. Human military doctrine had evolved during the war. What had begun as strikes against military targets had become something far more comprehensive. When Council species continued to resist, human forces had begun targeting their economic infrastructure. When they still refused to surrender, humans had started relocating entire populations. The galaxy had learned that humanity did not fight wars to make points or gain territory. They fought wars to win them completely and permanently. What about the Silthani? President Chen asked. Admiral Chen's expression grew grim. They chose extinction rather than surrender. The biological weapon they deployed against New Geneva forced our response. There are no Silthani left in the galaxy. President Chen felt a moment of regret. The Silthani had been a plant-based species with beautiful forests and peaceful cities. But when human colonists on New Geneva began dying from an engineered plague that targeted human DNA, Humanity had responded with overwhelming force. The human retaliation had been swift and absolute. Defoliant weapons that killed every plant, on Silthani worlds. Atmospheric processors that removed all carbon dioxide from their air. Within 6 months, an entire species had been reduced to dust and memories. It was a lesson that other council species had learned well. Humanity was capable of mercy, but only for enemies who surrendered quickly and completely. "Walk with me," President Chen said to her admiral. They left the assembly chamber and walked through corridors that had once echoed with the voices of beings who considered themselves the galaxy's rightful rulers. Now human technicians worked to install new equipment, while human soldiers guarded doorways that had once been protected by energy barriers. "Do you ever wonder if we've become the very thing Elena warned against?" President Chen asked as they walked. Admiral Chen considered the question. "You mean tyrants, conquerors? The council called us a contamination. They said we would spread across the galaxy and consume everything." "Look around us, Sarah. Isn't that exactly what we've done?" They stopped at a window that looked out over the capital city of Centauri Prime. Where crystal spires had once reached toward the sky, human architectural styles now dominated the skyline. The graceful alien curves had been replaced with the angular efficiency that humans preferred. "The difference," Admiral Chen said finally, "is that they chose this. Elena offered them peace. She offered them cooperation and friendship. They responded, with murder and threats of genocide. But look what we've become in response." Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment. The war had changed humanity in ways that went beyond military technology. The species that had sent Elena Vasquez as an ambassador had believed in diplomatic solutions and peaceful coexistence. The species that now ruled the galaxy had learned that some enemies could only be dealt with through overwhelming force. "Elena believed in the best of both species," Admiral Chen said. "She thought we could be friends, allies, partners in building something better." The council proved that was impossible. They resumed walking, passing through areas where human workers were installing new communication systems. The old council networks had been completely replaced with human quantum technology. Every world, every station, every ship in the galaxy now communicated through networks controlled from Earth. "The Karathi general asked me something yesterday," Admiral Chen continued. "He wanted to know why we hadn't simply exterminated all of them like we did the Silthani. He said most galactic conquerors would have killed everyone to prevent future rebellion." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that humanity remembers what Elena stood for. We may have lost our innocence, but we haven't lost our souls. The species that threaten us or commit atrocities against human civilians face extinction. The species that surrender and accept human authority get to live." They reached the former council leader's office, which had been converted into President Chen's workspace when she was on Centauri Prime. Through the windows, they could see human ships moving through the orbital traffic lanes, bringing supplies and personnel to the new galactic capital. "The Andromedans sent another message yesterday," Admiral Chen reported. "The galaxy next door is watching what's happened here. They're offering trade agreements and non-aggression pacts." President Chen smiled grimly. "I imagine they are. Word travels fast when an entire galactic government falls in 2 years. The Andromedan galaxy had been contacted by council scouts decades ago, but had refused to establish formal relations. Now they were suddenly very interested in diplomatic contact with humanity. What should I tell them? Tell them that humanity is interested in peaceful relations with neighbors who respect our sovereignty. But make sure they understand what happened to the last group who threatened human civilians." Admiral Chen nodded. "The memorial is ready for the dedication ceremony." They took a transport to the plaza where Elena Vasquez had been murdered. The execution platform had been removed, replaced by a simple black stone monument. Carved into the stone were Elena's final words, "Remember us, make them remember us all." Below that, in smaller text, was humanity's response, "We remembered. The galaxy will never forget." The dedication ceremony was attended by representatives from every human world and colony. Former council species who had accepted human authority were also present, a reminder of the new galactic order. President Chen stood before the monument, looking out at the crowd of humans and aliens who now lived under human rule. Elena Vasquez came here as humanity's ambassador, she began. She carried our hopes for peace, our dreams of joining the galactic community as equals. Instead, she found beings who saw us only as threats to be eliminated. The crowd was silent, humans and aliens alike listening to words that would shape galactic policy for generations to come. Elena believed in the possibility of friendship between species. She believed that different beings could work together to build something better than any could achieve alone. The Council murdered her for that belief. President Chen paused, her voice growing harder. But Elena's dream didn't die with her. Today, species that were once enemies work together under human leadership. Former Council worlds prosper under human protection. Trade flows freely through space lanes secured by human fleets. She gestured to the diverse crowd before her. This is Elena's true legacy. Not the war that followed her death, but the peace that came after. A peace secured by human strength and maintained by human justice. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a second monument, this one dedicated to all the species that now lived under human protection. It was a reminder that humanity had not conquered the galaxy for the sake of conquest, but to prevent future atrocities like Elena's murder. Later that evening, President Chen stood alone in her office, looking out at the city lights below. Admiral. Chen joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Do you think she would approve?" President Chen asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Elena? I think she would understand that we did what we had to do. The galaxy is safer now. No species will be declared contaminants and marked for extermination. No diplomat will be murdered for offering peace, at the cost of making humanity the dominant power in the galaxy. Would you rather have left the Council in charge? Would you rather have seen human colonies burned and human children murdered? Because we were declared unfit to exist?" President Chen sipped her coffee, considering. "No, but I want to make sure we don't become the monsters we fought against." "We won't," Admiral Chen said with certainty. "Because we remember Elena. Because we remember what we're fighting to protect." Through the window, they could see human families walking in the plaza below, human children playing in parks that had once been restricted to Council species only. Former enemies worked alongside humans, building a civilization that was stronger than what had come before. The galaxy had a new ruler, and humanity had a new responsibility. They had proven they could destroy their enemies completely. Now they had to prove they could build something better in the ruins. Elena Vasquez had died believing in the possibility of peace between species. Her death had brought war, but her memory,